Welcome to Worldview from WBEZ 91.5. In deep humility, I'm Steve Bynum, sitting in for the great Jerome McDonald. An estimated 1 million Hong Kongers took to the streets last Sunday to protest a bill that's working its way through the country's legislative committee. The bill would enable Hong Kong to extradite its citizens to countries it does not have extradition agreements with, like China. The Legislative Committee has seen its own share of protest as arguments over the bill descended into blows, leaving one Hong Kong lawmaker hospitalized last month. Earlier today, I spoke with Tom Grundy. He's editor-in-chief of the Hong Kong Free Press. And we started by talking about the implications of the proposed law.
Well, certainly this law has led to the largest protest probably in Hong Kong history, bringing, as organizers said, 1 million protesters onto the streets on Sunday. Very controversial. It was first tabled in February as a reaction to a murder case involving a Hong Konger in Taiwan. But this law, this update to the extradition laws in Hong Kong, will apply to any jurisdiction with which there are no existing agreements with the city, and that includes mainland China as well as Taiwan. And that's where the controversy arises, as there is a very different legal system just a few miles north of the border in autonomous Hong Kong here, over in China, where human rights provisions and the rule of law are very different to the British system of common law that Hong Kongers inherited. So people are very worried in different sectors in Hong Kong about what could happen, and they feel that they could face trial on the mainland if they are a dissenting voice against Beijing.
So let's give an example of what a law like this could mean. So, for instance, if a journalist were to print something that was unflattering, or if, let's say, for instance, in the democracy protest movement, if Beijing disapproved of the protest in some kind of way, what are sort of the repercussions of what this could mean in practical terms?
It's very difficult to say how it may be used, actually, because there is a history of these rules being applied in very vague and broad ways. And although journalism and these kinds of things are meant to be protected, there is just a huge mistrust, I think, in the local and the national authorities in Hong Kong. So that's why you see various sectors who generally aren't meant to speak up or very rarely speak up, such as journalists, such as lawyers, even judges who are not meant to, give such opinions publicly, have been registering their criticism, and that's alongside teachers, unions, pretty much artists. Every sector of Hong Kong have been signing hundreds of different petitions, and now we've seen over 100 businesses just today say that they will enact a labour strike. So every lever and sort of every sector of Hong Kong is speaking up against it because they are not sure how it may be applied in the future, if not immediately.
And so, for instance, there's a law that wasn't recently put on the books about the national anthem in China, in that in any way disparaging the national anthem or lampooning the national anthem or using the national anthem in parodies or videos could also make you subject to penalties and to jail time.
Well, that's next on the legislative agenda, yes. I mean, the extradition law is being accelerated through the local parliament, and it's going to arrive in the main chamber on Wednesday, and it could be passed by next Thursday. And right after the break in the summer, we'll be looking at the national anthem law. And that, many have said, is the most draconian incursion to free speech in the city yet, in what is meant to be a bastion of free expression, in Asia. But yes, that law could see people getting years in jail for parodying or mocking the national anthem. And to be honest, as journalists, it's unclear to us what would happen if we filmed someone doing so. And how that will link into the extradition law, we're unsure, but that's actually being tabled for local legislation. All of this, the wider picture, is part of what many Democrats fear is an increasing encroachment of Beijing on the city's civil liberties. And since those 2014 pro-democracy umbrella movement protests, there's certainly been a clampdown on the civil society and civil liberties in the city, with Democrats jailed over organizing the umbrella movement, parties banned from standing from election, political parties outright banned from existing, and and some lawmakers ousted from the legislature. So we often have these analogies of a slow-boiling frog or death by 1,000 cuts when it comes to freedoms in Hong Kong. But for a lot of academics, Democrats, and different sectors here, they see this as accelerating now, this process of integrating the city into China.
Tom Grundy is editor-in-chief and co-founder of Hong Kong Free Press, and he's on the scene in Hong Kong as a law is winding its way through the legislature that could make it a lot easier for Beijing to extradite people from Hong Kong on various charges or for various reasons. So, Tom, you are there on the scene. What have you been witnessing?
Well, things seem to be calm right at the moment, but there are some more impromptu protests planned for a few hours from now, and as the law arrives at the main legislative chamber tomorrow, there has been a lot of viral buzz online about gathering for a big picnic. There are some colonial-era laws in Hong Kong that forbid illegal assembly, public nuisance, and inciting people. So sometimes these things are planned in hushed or coded ways, but there are some mainstream protests also planned for tomorrow in the coming days, as well as some labour strike action. But at the moment, although there were some altercations near the metro station over some police stop and search action, they seem to be quite quiet at the moment. But that's not to say there isn't a hefty police presence all around the government headquarters and the legislature, and barricades, and the demonstration area has actually been closed. This is just a couple of days after that million-man march ended with some more dramatic scenes, pepper spray, as a handful of demonstrators clashed with police after the protest permit expired at midnight. Our team was down there, but it's unclear if we're going to see that kind of argy-bargy, as you might say in Britain, over the next few days. Things are generally quite peaceful in Hong Kong when it comes to protests.
And Tom, just to back up, this law has been very contentious in the Hong Kong legislature because you do have this division between those democratically elected legislators and those who are appointed by Beijing. Can you talk about that?
Well, a lot of the pro-Beijing lawmakers are actually also elected in, although when surveys are done over who people would prefer to elect, then yes, the Democratic and Progressive parties tend to do better. But it is true to say that just in the US, as politics is polarized between Trump supporters and those who don't, and in Britain, Remainers and Brexiteers, in Hong Kong, things tend to run along this spectrum of pro-Beijing to pro-democracy. And the pro-Beijing lawmakers, which are loyal to the government and Beijing, are certainly probably going to see this law through next Thursday. Democrats are using all means at their disposal to try and prevent that. Just a few weeks ago, we saw things turn physical in the legislature, which is quite rare in Hong Kong, as arguments ensued over who was in charge of the Bills Committee to vet this law. And the government intervened, said that the Bills Committee was not working, and thus it would be accelerated, and that's why we're seeing it in the main chamber tomorrow. So it's been a bumpy ride for this bill already as it moves through the legislature, and despite lots of different sections of society speaking out, including quite rarely the Catholic Church today, Chief Executive, the leader, Carrie, is a Catholic, I still think that this law will most likely pass with the support of the pro-establishment camp.
And speaking of Carrie Lam, can you talk about what she's been saying and what side she's taken and what her role has been as this law is winding its way through the legislature?
Well, Hong Kong's embattled leader has faced the biggest protest in post-colonial history, but she is standing firm. And just on the morning after the protest, she said that the government will continue to explain the law, but it will not be budging. Many Hong Kongers perceive the Hong Kong administration to be representing Beijing's interest to them rather than them representing Hong Kong people's interest to Beijing. So they're often seen as managers of public life, and they're not particularly powerful a lot of the time. But Chief Executive Carrie Lam apparently received death threats today over this bill, but this may only bolster the persistence that the government has in ensuring this goes through.
And so Where do things stand now, and what are some of the benchmarks that will be coming up and the important votes that we should know about?
Well, as I say, tomorrow is when it goes for its second reading, this controversial bill in the main legislative chamber. We're going to see large protests outside. There's some businesses that have said that they will be enacting a labor strike, which is very rare in the capital of capitalism in Asia, in Hong Kong. And I imagine they've not been announced yet, but we will see protests into the weekend. The organizers last Sunday's Million Man March said that there will be daily protests for the rest of the month. And it was mentioned today by the de facto speaker of the mini parliament here that this bill will be voted on next Thursday. So it's happening very fast, despite many sectors asking the government to slow down and there being no rush in it.
Tom Grundy is editor-in-chief and co-founder of Hong Kong Free Press, a nonprofit English-language news source based in Hong Kong. He's on the ground in Hong Kong. Tom, thank you so much for joining us.